Hello, and welcome to the GRACE podcast series. My name is Denise Brock, and I am the Operations Director for the Global Resource for Advancing Cancer Education, or GRACE. In this podcast series, we interview patients, advocates, and healthcare professionals to provide the most updated information for our community and to highlight important issues facing those dealing with a cancer diagnosis. We hope you find this information valuable. For questions or comments, please visit us at cancergrace.org.
For most of the last several decades, the standard treatment for patients with advanced or stage 4 lung cancer has been chemotherapy alone. We also have a subset of patients who may have a driver mutation, a specific mutation that is in their cancer for which we have a targeted treatment. And patients who have one of these driver mutations can do very well with a pill-based treatment, often for a long period of time, as their first-line therapy. Another relatively new approach is immunotherapy, giving typically an IV treatment that stimulates the immune system to better recognize and attack a lung cancer and some other different types of cancer. And over the last few years, we've received new study data that suggests that some patients can do very well by getting immunotherapy in combination with chemo or even instead of chemo as the first-line treatment approach, and that some of these patients can benefit from immunotherapy and leave chemotherapy on the side as an option to consider in the future when needed, but at least postpone that, potentially for a long period. The question then is, which patients are well served by pursuing immunotherapy alone? Now, the first point is that the patients who have one of these driver mutations like EGFR, ALK, ROS1, and some of the others are best served by pursuing targeted therapy and not immunotherapy. And that is the case even if they have high tumor PD-L1 expression. PD-L1 is a protein seen on some cancer cells, but not all of the cancers. And about a third of advanced lung cancers have no protein on their cancer cells, so less than 1%. And about 40% of advanced lung cancers have low-level PD-L1 expression, this protein that is seen in 1 to 49%, so less than half, but some of the cancer cells. And a little less than a third, about 30%, will have high tumor PD-L1 expression on the cancer cells, so that more than half of the cancer cells will have this protein. This protein is the target of these immune therapies and acts to serve as a cloaking mechanism, or essentially causes complacency of the immune system to not attack the cancer cells. So it says, I belong here, and when blocked by these immunotherapies, it increases the level of vigilance of the cancer so that it can better recognize and attack the cancer cell. And when the cancers have high-level PD-L1, they're more likely to rely on this feature and benefit and lead to a good, dramatic, and often long response to immunotherapy. What we've seen from the clinical trials in lung cancer over the last few years is that patients with high-level PD-L1, over 50%, which, as I said, is about 28 to 30% of patients, do significantly better when they start with immunotherapy, a drug called pembrolizumab or Keytruda, as a single drug compared to chemotherapy. And this is in terms of a higher chance of the tumor shrinking, a longer time before the cancer progresses, and these patients living longer. And so this approach of Keytruda as first-line treatment is FDA approved and well established as a standard of care, excellent choice for patients with high-level PD-L1. Some people will be recommended to get chemo with Keytruda, and that is another option that can work very well for patients, but immunotherapy alone is a strong choice for these patients with high PD-L1. Now, Keytruda is also FDA approved for patients with low PD-L1 in the 1 to 49% range when it is detected. And this is based on another study that showed that the patients who got Keytruda overall did better than the patients who got chemotherapy, even when it was a broader population that included not just high PD-L1, but low-level PD-L1. However, when we actually look at the results of this study, which is called Keynote-042, we see that the better results with Keytruda are really driven by the patients with high PD-L1, and that the patients with low PD-L1 didn't do better with Keytruda than chemo. They did okay, but the real benefit with Keytruda was driven by those with high PD-L1. And most experts in the field feel that patients with low PD-L1 are better served by receiving a combination of Keytruda with chemo, and that Keytruda alone is really not a preferred regimen for these people who may progress and not be able to get chemotherapy when they progress. They overall have a lower chance of responding to Keytruda alone if they have low PD-L1 compared to 50% or higher. The final thing I'd mention is that there are new data that have been presented in the fall of 2019 that show a combination of two immunotherapy drugs called Opdivo, or nivolumab, and Yervoy, which is ipilimumab. The combination of Nivo and Ipi, this two-drug immunotherapy combination, is significantly better than chemotherapy alone in a study called Checkmate 227. Now, this was the case for patients whether they had high PD-L1, low PD-L1, or negative PD-L1, and it is an option to consider. However, this two-drug immunotherapy combination, though it didn't include chemo, was not really less toxic than chemotherapy. It just had different side effects. And so this is an option that at this moment in November of 2019 is not FDA approved, but is likely to be FDA approved soon, will likely emerge as a reasonable option to consider that doesn't include chemo, but it is a overall more toxic treatment approach than Keytruda alone. And so this will represent an immunotherapy option without the chemotherapy that is more broadly available to patients. Not as clear whether it is a stronger choice than Keytruda alone for the patients with high PD-L1, or better than chemo with Keytruda for many other patients. So we'll be watching that. We will learn more. And of course, we don't have a direct comparison. It's just that both of these options have been compared to chemo alone. Both are better than chemo alone, and it remains a judgment call which to favor.
Thank you again for joining us. This podcast was made possible by the generosity of sponsorship from our friends at Lilly, Novartis, Takeda, AstraZeneca, and Exelixis. Please like and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Send us feedback, share your story, donate and visit us for more information at cancergrace.org. Thank you for listening.